Good day to you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Time Doctor webinar today, simply called Unlocking AI Insights and then Mastering the Unusual Activity Report. Um, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and it's wonderful to have you with us. Please, why don't you take a moment in the chat, just say maybe where you're watching us from, where you're joining us from, and let's get some feedback going whilst I continue and just share some insights about myself and my fellow colleague who's joining me today. So let's get those going. While we do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Calvin. I am based in Worcester, South Africa, which is a small town that's just outside of Cape Town. A lot of people know where Cape Town is. And I've been a client success manager with Time Doctor for just over 2 years now. And a fun fact about me is it's not really a fun fact, it's just a fact. I really love sport. I really love rugby and football, especially. And so it's what I kind of tend to spend a lot of my time doing, my spare time doing is watching football and rugby. Antonio, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Calvin. Hola, hola. So this is Antonio Gonzalez. I'm a group product manager at Time Doctor. I'm based in Barcelona, Spain, though these days I'm spending a few weeks in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. If you're around and want to meet and chat about Time Doctor, I'm all ears. And something about me, I love sports as well, swimming, water polo. But I think my favorite sport, I don't know if it could be a sport, but it's dancing salsa. I love casino, Cuban salsa. That's my thing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That is a fun fact. In fact, Antonio, I didn't know that about you, so it's good to know. So whenever I need some salsa lessons, I'll come knocking on your door, and hopefully you can share some moves with me. Thank you for just telling us in the chat where you're from and for greeting us. Good morning once again. If you're just logging on, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's myself, Calvin, and Antonio with you for this morning. And just to take a look at our agenda for today, obviously, we're going to introduce you to the unusual activity report and what it's about and how it works. We'll talk about, how you can get started with it. Also, in terms of the accuracy, how do you know if the report is accurate? What is it telling you? And what insights you can get from that. We will also have some time towards the end to have a Q&A session. So with that being said, please note there is a Q&A button, well, Q&A tab, I should say. It's either to the right of your screen or it will be just below the chat box. So you can please put your questions in there throughout the conversation and we'll gladly chat and pick them up at the end. And lastly, obviously, we'll just wrap up with an overview of what we've discussed so far. Just some general webinar and housekeeping reminders. As with all our webinars, you will have noticed, if you haven't yet, that your mic is muted. This is by default. This is just to make sure that we can get through everything that we need to get through without any disturbances. But like I mentioned, you can ask all your questions in real time via the QA function, which is obviously in the app. We will be sharing this recording with everybody that's registered. So if you miss anything during the course of the presentation, you can always refer back to it. You'll receive the recording a few days or maybe a couple of hours after we finish, but you will receive it quite shortly in your inbox. Also, because we are sharing some insights and information about our product and about some of the features, everybody that has been invited or everybody that has registered is either a client of ours or a customer of ours. So we want to ask you that we can keep this confidential with regards to what we share, and that brings me to mention our safe harbor statement. Which is just simply that whatever Antonio and I speak about today is some of the things may already be implemented, some of the things we may yet to implement, and obviously we want to just let you know that some of the things might not be implemented, might be changed, might be removed, or things might look different in the future. So we just want to let you know that's what it's about, so that you're aware and for anything that comes up in the future. That's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to you, Antonio, because you are going to introduce and give us a little bit more insights into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, thank you. So before we jump into explaining what an usual activity report is, I'd like to focus on the problem that we're aiming to solve through this report. You might have heard different devices that are called mouse jigglers. So it's actually what you see on the right side of this slide. That's a mouse jiggler. It's basically a hardware device that you connect to your laptop, or it works on a battery. And basically, you place the mouse just on top of it, and it simulates human behavior. So basically, the mouse moving around, etc. There are also like software tools that simulate human behavior on a device. So with our unusual activity report, we basically detect those unusual activities that are happening due to utilizing this type of software, this type of hardware, basically to create some peace of mind to you. So you can be sure that your employees, your team members are actually working rather than pretending they're working because they're using like this software or hardware. And bear in mind that this is like specific software hardware that exists in the market. Sometimes people might use like more rudimentary tools like the one that we have on the screen, just like a Roomba that's moving around with, the mouse just tied to it, or other specific tactics that we'll cover later with examples showing you the report. So that is kind of the introduction. We can now jump to, what it is. Calvin, back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Antonio. So, getting started. How do we get started? So, if you are a user and you want to know where is this unusual activity report, you will find it under the reports section or under the reports tab in your dashboard. Now, you may be sitting there and thinking, but why do I not see it? Where is it? Right? So the truth is, it's only available for customers with a premium subscription, right? So if you are a basic subscription or a standard subscription, you will not have direct access to it. You might be able to see a screen that's telling you have a certain amount of users that have popped up on the unusual activity report, but you don't actually have the report. Okay, so this is only accessible to those who are on premium. If you are wanting to be on premium, you can contact our support team or you can contact your CSM if you have one, and we can talk to you about how you can get that into your platform. Also to note, if your company has 10 or less Time Doctor users, the unusual activity report will only be accessible to owners and admins. But if you have more than 10, then it's accessible to owners, admins, and managers within the platform. So that's something to know because we get those questions a lot. We get a lot of people saying, "Can my managers have a look at the unusual activity report?" So if you have more than 10 users, then definitely, and you can add your managers to be able to view that report. So how does it work? Before Antonio dives into a little bit of an actual demo, there are three variables and five categories. So three variables and five categories. The three variables are mouse clicks, mouse movements, and keyboard strokes. So those are the three variables that the unusual activity report will work with and will look at and will search through for sort of what the algorithm looks for. The five categories of the unusual activity report, as you can see, they're on the screen. So unusually high keystrokes, right? So remember, it's things that are pretty much unusual behavior for a human being. That's what we're looking for. So unusually high keystrokes, mouse moves without any clicks, unusually high mouse clicks, or something that's consistent mouse moves or keyboard strokes. So if something looks too consistent, then it's something that will be able to picked up by this report, and also long keyboard activity with no mouse clicks. So if you just have your keyboard movement and there's no mouse clicks, that can be seen as something that not necessarily what a human being or the type of behavior that we will assert with a human being. So that's what we're looking at. Three variables, five categories, and I'm going to hand it back to Antonio, who's going to show us a little bit more.
Thank you, Calvin. So I'm actually going to walk you through how an unusual activity report looks like with a real demo. So what you're going to see, it's basically our product. So you can see it now on your screen. I'm landing on the executive dashboard because I'm a premium customer. And as Calvin was explaining, you can see there's a new report here called unusual activity. So this report basically has the same or similar options to other reports. Like you can select the users that you would like to see information on the report. You can adapt the time zone. You can adapt timeframes like day, week, month, or date range. And when you land on this report, basically what we show you is directly who are the users who have reported some unusual activity time during this period selected. So, for instance, the users that you see on the screen right now are basically part of like our quality team, just testing the report, etc. And I'm going to use like a couple of examples that where we have used like some software to simulate human behavior. So I'm going to start with the first user that you see here, Test Manager A. As I was mentioning, unusual activity total time, it's shown as 6 hours 50 minutes in September. So this user had some unusual activity detected in this time frame. Something worth mentioning is that our unusual activity algorithm works in chunks of 30 minutes. So we analyze 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes. If some unusual activity occurs during that chunk, we label those 30 minutes as unusual activity. And you might see that not all the times here are multiples of 30. That might be because the user just stopped tracking time before the 30 minutes chunk. But still, there was some unusual activity in that chunk of time. So we label it as unusual activity. So let's dive deeper into Test Manager A. So when you click on that user, there's several information that you can dive deeper into. First of all, the type of unusual activity. For this user, it's been long periods of mouse moves with no mouse clicks. So basically, this means like the unusual activity is they are moving the mouse but no clicks, which is kind of unusual. Typically, we interact with a device by, keystrokes, moving the mouse, clicking somewhere. So this is labeled as suspicious. 6 hours, 50 minutes. If this user have more types of unusual activity, they will also appear here, like high level of keystrokes, etc. In this particular case, this one, when you click, you're gonna land into the timestamps where this unusual activity was detected. So the first thing that gets my attention is that this user between 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's been unusual activity consistently detected on every 30 minutes timestamp. This is something that it's also valuable for you to analyze how recurring these behaviors are. Is this something that just happened like 30 minutes, never again, or is this consistent over time? Because if someone invests on some specific software or hardware, they're likely to use it on a recurring basis. So I'm just going to go for the first time stamp. You can click there and you will land in this graph, in this visual. It's basically a visual representation of the three variables that Calvin was explaining before. The algorithm takes those three variables into consideration to determine whether unusual activity happened or not. Those three variables are the ones that you see here at the top: keystroke, mouse movement, mouse click. You can actually select the ones that you like to visualize. In this specific case, by default, we show you mouse movements and mouse clicks because they are the ones who are heavily connected to the type of unusual activity. If the unusual activity would be high keystrokes, you would only see keystrokes selected by default, but you can add, these three variables to get the big picture of what's going on. Then the way to read this graph is basically you'll have a granularity here of seconds. So what you're seeing, for example, I just selected mouse clicks, is that mouse clicks, it's 0 per second consistently through this 30 minutes timestamp. This aligns well with the unusual activity that we detected, which is like no mouse clicks, but there are actually a lot of mouse movements. So there's clearly something that might feel unusual in this behavior, a lot of moving around the mouse but not clicking anywhere. And to explore a bit further this user, and this is also one recommendation that we typically do, is to check the graph with all the variables and then with each individual variable. For example, in this case, keystroke. You can see here that keystrokes seems to be consistent pattern. It's like one keyboard stroke per second consistently through the 30 minutes. And then a few like two keystrokes per second. Once it was three. So there's clearly something that feels like consistent pattern, which is not human behavior. We are unpredictable and we don't typically have like these consistent patterns. So this is something that you can get from this graph. And something else that you could get from the graph is basically the maximum number that we have of actions per second is 9. 9, it's the cap number. It might be like 20 actions per second, 10 actions per second, or actually 9. However, anything that's over 9, we typically consider quite unusual for being like human typical behavior. So clearly, there are a few things here that, got my attention, which is no mouse clicks, a lot of mouse movement, and a consistent keystroke pattern. So what I would do is probably I'll just dive into another timestamp. Again, long periods of mouse moves with no clicks. And I see again a lot of mouse movements, no mouse clicks, and keystrokes, again, a consistent pattern. One keystroke per second, sometimes two, a few times three. So this is clearly something unusual, especially considering it's been ongoing for 8 hours. So what would I do next? What are our recommendations after you have gone through this path? Like, okay, I know this user, Test Manager A. We should probably have chosen a different name, but Test Manager A. You analyze, okay, what is the type of like unusual activity and when did it happen? And read the graphs. What do you do after that? So we have a few recommendations. The first one is to enable screenshots for that specific user so you can dive deeper into the details of what's happening. And one thing about our unusual activity report is that if the user who had unusual activity, like for example, unusually high keystrokes, if this user had screencasts enabled, we actually show the screencasts for that user directly on the unusual activity report. So you don't need to go back and forth. And from the screenshots, you can actually get like some valuable information. For example, let's have a look at this user. So August 21st, the type of unusual activity is unusually high keystrokes. We show keystrokes selected by default because it's the one that's connected the most with this type. But again, you can just, select the other ones to get the big picture. What is something that gets your attention here? It's basically that during this period between 7:02 a.m. till almost 7:08 a.m., this user had a consistent pattern of like keyboard strokes over the maximum for a sustained period of time. This could be a rudimentary technique, not using mouse jigglers, not using like software tools, etc. It might be just someone putting something heavy, like a heavy object, on top of the keyboard. So it continuously presses like one keyboard stroke over time. So idle time doesn't go into like low levels. So these are like two types of unusual activity that you can easily spot directly in our report. I want to go back to the first user, the one on September 2024. And recapping on the initial recommendations. First of all, understand what's the role of that user. Like if the type of unusual activity is high, like unusually high keystrokes, is that someone who typically like a software developer who's typing and running scripts, or is that someone from sales who's usually on calls? So basically read the graph on the context of the role of the person that you're checking. After that, understand what you're seeing on the graph, like actions per second, okay, mouse movements per second, mouse clicks per second, keystrokes. Then, if that person has screenshots enabled, great. Go check those screenshots during the period of time where the unusual activity happened. So I'm actually going to do that right now. I think I have it somewhere here. So let's assume that person, like as we are, we have seen continuous patterns of unusual activity with this user, we decided to enable screenshots, screencast. As I am a premium customer, I also have video screen recording available to me. So I can visualize, for example, just the screen of that user. I'm not moving my mouse. So basically, this is a video screen recorded of what the user was doing. And it's easy to spot that, sure, the mouse is moving around, there's no clicks, and the keystrokes might be the typical command shift to change to a different task, command shift to change to, for example, now Time Doctor app, command shift to change to, let's see what's next. So you can easily spot that there's no action happening here, and you can see how it connects to the graph that we just saw. Mouse movements, sure, they're happening, no clicks, and then some keystrokes, which is basically command shift to change a tab. Obviously, all the tabs that this person is opening might be labeled as productive. Like it's the Time Doctor desktop app, it's a Chrome browser, it's one of our dashboards. So unusual activity report basically helps you understand and detect when that unusual activity happened. And then in order to get like the whole picture, you can check with screenshots. What is another recommendation that we have? So we've checked the type of unusual activity, we understand the role of that person, and we have checked whether that's behavior that consistent, like it happens consistently. After that, we have understood the graph and the visuals that we're getting. If we need further intel, we enable screencast to check like the activities that are happening for that specific user during that time. And another recommendation is there might be times where people just use like rudimentary tools like the one that I showed you the last. So basically placing a heavy object on the keyboard, and unless you're sitting next to that person in the office, you might not like see that happening. But if they're using software tools, you can check web and app report in case that person started tracking time with Time Doctor before they actually activated the tool. So maybe you see like a weird tool being used from the web and app report for that specific user when the unusual activity was detected. And also, another recommendation that we have is basically during the time that unusual activity was detected for a specific user, it might be worth to check another report, the activity summary report, to evaluate the idle time and activity levels. Because usually, when people use mouse jigglers or software tools that simulate human behavior, idle time and activity levels, idle time usually is quite low. Activity level is usually quite high because basically the mouse is moving on a specific cadence constantly, etc. So this is more or less how to get the most out of unusual activity report. And I'll jump in a second again to recap some of the recommendations that we have. But to close a bit, unusual activity report. A key aspect is basically happening at the beginning. Aim to understand what is the role of the person that you're seeing on unusual activity. For example, a QA engineer, someone who's testing the products that you deliver, the digital products that you deliver, might create a script to simulate like clicks on a specific parts of your product just to, do stress test or performance testing. So that's actually unusual activity, but for a reason. They are simulating human behavior to test your product. Or software developers, they might have unusually high keystrokes with no mouse movements or mouse clicks because, like for example, this one, basically because they mastered the technique of moving around different parts of the device just using your keyboard and just like running a script, waiting for it till it compiles, and then clicking next, etc. So what's really important is think about the context of the person you are analyzing. So with that, I'll recap on some of the recommendations again. Basically, think about the context. Then select all variables and understand what you're visualizing in our graphs section. After that, if the user doesn't have screenshots enabled, enable them and check during those times when unusual activity was happening. After that, you can also check web and app report in case they use some tools while they were tracking time and they show there with weird names that we don't understand, or check activity summary just to see idle time. Is that, idle time consistent for that user over time? Or suddenly the idle time is really low when unusual activity it's triggered. And after that, while you have like all that information, it's time for you to discuss with the employee just to understand like, okay, so with that, and before we jump into Q&A and so on, just a comment on the accuracy. And here I would like to mention that we detect both hardware and software. So rudimentary things, as I was explaining, like just someone placing a heavy object on the keyboard, you saw it clearly on the graph. It's basically like 9 keystrokes per second during 3 minutes, which is like not humanly possible. And then there are tools that are, coming, and we're continuously improving our detection algorithm to be up to speed with everything that we are identifying. So basically the accuracy is quite high for like mouse jigglers, software tools that simulate human behavior. But the good thing is that we are well aware of those tools and we're continuously improving the algorithm to improve the accuracy. So with that, I hope I'm not missing anything. uh, I'll pass it to you, Calvin, for Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Antonio. I think you pretty much covered everything. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your insights and showing your knowledge of the unusual activity report. Um, we have come to obviously the Q&A section, and we have quite a few questions. I know that our colleague Michael was answering some of the questions, but I'm not sure if everybody was able to see the answers. So we'll probably get to some of those. But first of all, I'll throw this one out to you, back to you, Antonio. Is how do we ensure that the unusual activity report respects user privacy?
Yep. So that's a great question. And For unusual activity report, I would like to emphasize again the variables that we use for that specific report. It's basically mouse clicks, mouse movements, keyboard strokes. No context is basically we analyze those variables. So there's like you can see like how user privacy is respected. There's no context. It applies the same user privacy principles as in every other report at Time Doctor. Like all the information is secure. We don't have like personified information. Like for example, for Time Doctor employees, we cannot see like personified information. So that's the way that we respect user privacy.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for that great question. I'll take those. And there's a question here. It says, "Can we know what key is pressed or typed?" And I think we kind of covered it. You kind of covered it in your presentation, but the essence is no. Like we can't know the exact key that's pressed. We're not a key logging software. We're just able to pick up on activity. So key activity, movement of the mouse, and the number of clicks, etc. So be very knowledgeable and be very aware that we are not able to see what is typed exactly, but we just be able to pick up on the activity. But that's another great question because it comes up a lot, especially with me when I speak to clients. They're always asking, "Can you see what I'm typing?" So the answer is no. Cool. So let's. I think some of them you answered kind of already, sort of, Antonio, in your presentation. Because there's a question here that says, what if the user denies using any third-party tool or hardware? We spoke about how you can look at screencasts and go through all of those different things. So we won't jump back onto that one. But I'll ask this one: Is there any way to adjust the report, the unusual activity report parameters, based on sort of industry or specific roles?
So there is no way at the moment. We understand there's value behind this, and it's definitely something that we are exploring. And I understand the reason behind, which is like, and what can be labeled as unusual activity for a software developer, like running a script, or a QA engineer, might not be, unusual activity for sales and the other way around. So we definitely see that that's an area to explore in the future. With the current unusual activity report, there's no way to adjust parameters based on industry or specific roles.
Yeah, thank you. And another one, this one I'll throw back at you as well. It's the time frame. So there's a question, and I think I've received this question from customers as well. What is the time frame between what the unusual activity captures
Mhm.
and when it will show into the report? So, for example, if
Mhm.
there's an unusual activity today, will I see it today? Will I see it tomorrow? Will I see it next week? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Usually, well, always we process the information in 30 minutes chunks at midnight UTC time. So the data is actually processed and updated at midnight UTC time. After that, we show it in the unusual activity report. So the worst case scenario is that there is a 24 hours delay on the unusual activity actually happening and you seeing it in the report just because unusual activity happened 1 minute after midnight UTC. So you might need to, just visualize that information after the next cycle of processing that information.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. As you said, I'm just trying to scroll through to see if there's anything that we have missed before we move forward. There is a question here about how much does premium cost. There is a link that's in the chat, so if you can click on that link, it will give you all the detail that you need. Or if you have a customer success manager or CSM, you can contact them directly. And then also, Dolly asked if she just logged in. You missed the most important part, Dolly, but have no fear. The recording of the meeting will be sent to you, so you'll be able to view it at your leisure. I think that is it for the questions, Antonio. I think we've covered all of the questions. I'm just browsing through the actual audience chat to see if there was anything that came up over there, but I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. So yeah, I wanna just thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your time and being a part of this meeting, and just coming to find out more about how you can unlock AI to help you just be more productive, and help you make sure that you're using the tool to its effectiveness. And we don't we I always say, as a CSM, and people say, "Oh, but someone is cheating. I need to get rid of them." And I always come back and I say, you know what? Always look at understand your employees' behavior as well. Because sometimes, like you mentioned, there could be typical ways of working that might come across as unusual, but it's just their style of working. So always review the things, as Michael as Antonio mentioned, just going back and reviewing all the recommendations. So, yeah, Antonio, any last words from your side?
No, I think we're good. And if you have like any further questions, you know where to find us, timedoctor.com. So yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, once again. It's been great being here. Thank you to Antonio for sharing his knowledge. And as always, like he said, you know where to find us. Go to our website, chat to our support team. And until next time, we will see you again. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.